much. But we begin with a potentially historic development unfolding in the Middle East right now. As we told you yesterday, multiple Israeli publications reported that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, along with Mossad chief Yossi Cohen, flew to Saudi Arabia to meet with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, the reported meeting could represent a major next step in the recent peace deals known as the Abraham Accords.
During a meeting of his Likud party, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refused to confirm or deny the trip to Saudi Arabia.
My friends, I have never addressed such things along the years, and I will not start with that now. And I can only tell you that for years as Prime Minister, I have spared no effort to strengthen Israel and expand the circle of peace. And with the help of God, we managed to do that with our neighbors, with the Emirates, with Bahrain. And I also hope that this wave will always go and expand.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo did visit Saudi Arabia and met with the Crown Prince, but a Saudi official denied any Israelis were present. No such meeting occurred. The only officials present were American and Saudi. Despite the denial, Joel Rosenberg on his news site, All Israel News, said his sources confirmed the meeting. Rosenberg has organized 2 meetings with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and U.S. evangelical leaders. Rosenberg wrote, "We should be cautious in drawing any hasty conclusions that the Saudis are ready to seal a formal peace deal. But a meeting with Netanyahu could be seen as the first of many steps toward negotiating such a deal. There is a case, however, for moving quickly. Joe Biden has threatened to reassess the U.S.-Saudi alliance, which has grown strong under President Trump. President Trump has said a number of times the Saudis would eventually sign on to the Abraham Accords, the agreements a few months ago between the Israelis and Arab nations. Earlier this year, Rosenberg told CBN News what it would mean if the Saudis normalized relations with Israel and came to Jerusalem.
It would be historic if the Saudis, who are already starting to warm their relations with Israel, but if they decided that the king or the crown prince or one of their major leaders was to come here, you would be covering it, and it would be huge. It would be an epic-making moment.
On Sunday, a flight tracking website showed a plane flew from Tel Aviv to Neom, Saudi Arabia. CBN News has visited Neom in northwest Saudi Arabia, which they plan to be a city of the future.
And Chris joins me now live from Jerusalem. So, Chris, this was supposed to be a secret meeting. How did it become so public?
Well, first of all, George, I think it was meant to be made public. I think when you look at the Israeli media, that came out very soon, that this leaked information about this secret trip. Joel Rosenberg on his website, he confirmed that. He has great sources there in the Middle East and many of these Sunni Arab nations. And I would say probably the most telling thing was the transponder. You know, we just showed you that that you could track the plane all the way from Tel Aviv to Neom there in Saudi Arabia. Now, they can turn the transponder off, but they obviously meant for it to be seen. You could track that flight all the way down to Neom, which is actually, as the report says, you know, what Saudi Arabia wants to be a city of the future. But obviously, George, this was meant to be made public, I think, for political reasons here in Israel, but other reasons as well, geopolitically.
Chris, what is drawing both Saudi Arabia and Israel so close together?
Well, I'll give you 3 reasons, George. Iran, Iran, Iran. You know, they see Iran as their mortal enemy, and they see that, you know, they both see a potentially nuclear Iran as a mortal threat to both of them. So I think that's bringing them together. And I also think there's a change in the Kingdom of Saud as well. There's a new, younger generation that really wants to open up to the world. I think you see that in the UAE. You see that in Bahrain. I remember an interview I had with several young Saudis, and that's exactly what they were telling me. You know, we're not the older generation. We're a new generation. We want to be open to the world, and they want to see this normalization of relations with Israel. It's really a new dawn here in the Middle East, if you could say that. You couldn't imagine this 10, 15, 20 years ago, but it seems to be a new Middle East shaping up, and you see all these Sunni Arab nations normalizing relations with Israel.
And all of obviously all of this coming under the Trump administration. How did President Trump manage to pull off the Abraham Accords?
Well, I think they looked at the Middle East from a new paradigm. I think for years, really decades, everyone had looked at the Middle East through the lens of the Israeli-Palestinian issue. In fact, John Kerry, the former U.S. Secretary of State under the Obama administration, there's a clip of him that says that there is no way that the Sunni Arab nations will make a peace deal with Israel unless they first settle the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the fact is, there's a famous clip of him saying that. But I think right now that these Sunni Arab nations, they have their own national interests, and they're not bound by the Israeli-Palestinian issue. All of them have the shadow of a nuclear Iran, overshadowing them, both Israel and in Saudi Arabia and these Sunni Arab Gulf states. We were there in September of 2019 when Saudi was attacked by Iran. And so they look at that as an ominous sign. That's a non-nuclear threat. But you can imagine what they would do with a nuclear umbrella of Iran.
Chris, real quickly, what's the likelihood that Saudi Arabia and Israel can come to a peace agreement before the end of the Trump administration in January?
Well, actually, there's probably an incentive for them, because if they see the Biden administration that really had appeased both Biden and Obama for many years, so they had appeased Iran, they really turned their back and abandoned some of their longtime allies like Saudi, that might be this window of time where they would want to come and make a peace deal with Israel. We'll see. We have a few months to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Terrific. Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate you coming on the broadcast. Chris Mitchell, Middle East Bureau Chief there in